The Mafia boss walked into the hospital. She whispered, "Funny how pain still gets your attention." The rain over Seattle was not a drizzle. It was a cold, relentless assault, turning the city into a watercolor of bleeding neon and wet asphalt. Just before midnight, the automatic doors of North Lake Meridian Hospital hissed open, parting the deluge to admit a figure who did not belong. Cassia Voss did not stumble. She walked with a controlled, rigid posture, one hand clamped hard against her left side. Her black leather jacket, tailored and expensive, was ruined, slick with a mixture of rainwater and something darker, thicker, that dripped onto the sterile linoleum. The triage receptionist, a young man accustomed to the city's usual Saturday night chaos, looked up. His jaw went slack. He saw the sharp, severe cut of her dark hair, the pale intensity of her face, and the impossible amount of blood soaking through her clothes. Cassia leaned toward the protective glass, close enough for him to see the exhaustion warring with the sheer force of her will. Her voice was a low rasp, cutting through the sterile hum of the ER. "Funny how pain still gets your attention." The receptionist fumbled for the button, his voice cracking as he called for a gurney. They put her in Trauma Bay 3. Dr. Rowan Calder pushed through the curtain, his movements economical, his face calm. He was a man who had seen everything the emergency room could throw at him, and his past in the Civic Integrity Unit had trained him to see the stories hidden beneath the trauma. Cassia Voss. He read from the chart the nurse thrust at him, his eyes already scanning her. "Report says assault." "Knife," Cassia corrected, her voice tight with pain. "Long blade, likely serrated." Rowan nodded, his focus absolute. He began the assessment, his voice flat. "Allergies." "Incompetence." He ignored the barb, his attention on her left hand. Her fingers were pale and cold, adorned with two heavy, simple rings, now slick with her own blood. He needed a reliable IV line. "I need these off." He did not wait for her permission. His grip was firm, professional, as he began to gently but forcefully work the rings over her cold knuckle. It was an intimate, grounding action. As he slid the second ring free, he felt it a coiled stillness in her, a heavy, dense authority that had nothing to do with the expensive jacket. He met her gaze. Her eyes were gray, not a soft, welcoming gray, but the color of the Puget Sound during a violent storm front. He dropped the rings into a sterile kidney dish. They landed with a flat, metallic clink. A nurse moved to cut away the jacket. Cassia's hand shot out, stopping her. "My phone, left pocket." Rowan retrieved it, the device slick and heavy. As he placed it on the utility tray beside her, the screen lit up, a single, encrypted message. Rowan was too far away to read the text, but he saw Cassia's eyes narrow, a flicker of something cold passing through them. "Nightwolf knows you're there." Her gaze snapped from the phone to the glass doors of the trauma bay, then past them, toward the main ambulance entrance far across the floor. Rowan instinctively followed her look. For a fraction of a second, a silhouette blocked the ambient, flashing light of a passing ambulance. A man, too tall, standing too still in the downpour. Then he was gone. Rowan felt the atmosphere in the bay shift. This was not a street mugging gone wrong. This was an ambush, a sophisticated, predatory siege that had followed her here. "We need to irrigate this wound and see how deep it goes," Rowan said, turning back to her. His voice all business. "I'm ordering a mild sedative and local anesthesia. We need to suture." "No." Cassia's voice was absolute, local only. "Nothing that dulls the edges. I need my wits." "Miss Voss, this is a deep tissue laceration, likely involving muscle. The cleaning and suturing process will be excruciating." "I'm aware," she said. She pushed herself up slightly on her elbows, a sharp intake of breath the only sign of her agony. "I also need a different room. This bay is too exposed." She glanced up at the black security camera dome in the corner, one with fewer cameras. Rowan paused, the request clicking into place with the shadow he had just seen. She was not asking for privacy to be vulnerable. She was asking for a tactical advantage. She was not trying to hide. She was setting a trap. "The internal procedure room, Bay 6, he said. "It's more secure. Shielded, Do it." As they wheeled her gurney down the fluorescent-lit corridor, Rowan examined the wound more closely. The cut was precise, angled low, just above the hip bone. It was designed to bleed, to incapacitate, but to miss the vital organs. It was a signature, a message. This was professional, Rowan murmured, almost to himself. A warning shot, not a kill shot. Cassia's eyes stayed locked on his face. "You see a lot of these. Doctor, I see what comes through my doors." They were interrupted by two uniforms from the Metropolitan Organized Crime Directorate, the MOCD. They looked damp, tired, and annoyed. "Miss Voss," the older one began, flipping open a rain-spotted notepad. "We got a call about an incident down at Pier 70. Can you tell us what happened tonight?" Cassia Voss slowly turned her head on the pillow. The pain was clearly setting in, a fine sheen of cold sweat on her brow, but her eyes remained lucid. She gave the officers a smile so thin it was barely a curve. And she said nothing. "Absolute infuriating silence, huh?" Doctor the cop tried, turning to Rowan in frustration. "I am busy keeping my patient alive," Rowan said, pushing the gurney through the doors of Bay 6. "You can wait outside." He let the doors swing shut. Bay 6 was smaller, windowless and private. He began setting up the suture tray, the metallic sounds sharp in the small space. He administered the local anesthetic, the needle sliding into the torn, raw flesh. Cassia did not flinch, but her knuckles went white on the gurney rail. While he scrubbed in, she used her one good hand to dial her phone, pressing it to her ear. She spoke in a low, urgent tone, but the small room held the sound. "Elodie. Yes, I'm fine. Listen to me. The Northlake servers, they used it." Rowan froze, his hands under the hot water. "It was the Night Wharf Syndicate," Cassia continued, her voice dropping even lower. "They used malware, the one that hit your hospital records last week. They're not just stealing supplies, Elodie. They are using the entire medical system as a data front." Rowan turned off the water. He understood now. The CIU had chased ghosts like this shadowy groups using legitimate infrastructure for criminal enterprise. Elodie Voss, her sister, a compromised medical file. This was infinitely more dangerous than the knife wound. He pulled on his sterile gloves, the latex snapping against his wrists, and approached her. "This will take about 30 stitches. You need to stay perfectly still." He began the work. The curved needle dipped and rose, pulling the ragged edges of her skin together. It was meticulous, practiced work. Cassia did not watch his hands. She watched his face. Their eyes locked over the sterile blue field. It was a silent, intense negotiation. Rowan, the doctor, was focused on her heart rate, her breathing, the tension in her muscles. But Cassia, the head of the Voss Consortium, was measuring something else entirely. She was measuring his courage. She was measuring his limits. She was deciding if he was a variable she could control or one she would have to eliminate. The air in the room was thick with the smell of antiseptic, iron, and the cold ozone of the Seattle night. Rowan tied off the final suture, his movements economical and precise. Cassia Voss never broke eye contact. In that moment, they both understood the same, stark truth. The hospital, with its bright lights and promises of healing, was no longer a sanctuary. Tonight, it was a stage, and the second act was about to begin. Rowan Calder tied the final, precise knot, his gloved fingers moving with the steady economy of a man who had walled off his past. But as he applied the sterile dressing, his mind was not on the patient in front of him. It was on the wound itself. The angle was low, pulling upward. It was clean, despite its depth, not the ragged tear of a desperate street criminal. It was a signature. Years ago, in a brightly lit briefing room at the Civic Integrity Unit, he had seen that mark, a projection on a white screen, a case file marked with a red flag, the Karlik signature, the preferred method of a specific Balkan assassin known for delivering messages for high-end clients. The CIU had a file on him, a file that was now, like Rowan's entire former life, sealed and buried under layers of official redaction. He was a ghost, and he had just been in Seattle, holding a knife to Cassia Voss. He cut the tape, his movements betraying nothing. "You'll need antibiotics, and you are not to leave." Cassia watched him, her gray eyes clear and analytical. Even as pain radiated from her side, she saw the minute tightening of his jaw. He knew. He recognized the work. This complicated things. Her own coldness was not a performance. It was a foundation. Poured and cured in the salt-stung air of the Bremerton dockyards, she had not been a child of privilege. She'd been the daughter of a machinist, watching her mother fight to keep a small shop from being swallowed by loan sharks. Cassia, at 12, was the one who learned to read the fine print. At 15, she was the one who renegotiated terms with men twice her size, men who smelled of stale beer and rust. Her strength was not forged in violence, it was forged in poverty. It was the hard, unyielding calm of realizing no one was coming to help. You paid the debt, or you lost the shop. The Voss Consortium was born from that realization. It started small, a network of dock workers and machinists pooling resources to protect their families from the human traffickers that prowled the waterfront. It was protection, simple as that. Over the years, that network grew. It became logistics. It became information. It became an empire that moved goods faster and quieter than anyone else. An organization that operated in the shadows because the light was too slow, too corrupt. It brought both legitimate cargo and darkness to the shores of Seattle. Rowan stripped off his gloves and tossed them into the biohazard bin. He had built his own walls, for very different reasons. He had been the CIU's best medical investigator. He was the one who saw patterns in prescription fraud that led to money laundering rings. He uncovered vast insurance scams that funded cartels. He was good. He was too good. Then came the data explosion. It was not a bomb. It was a leak, a digital detonation, a protected witness list, medical files, informant identities, all of it vaporized from their secure server, or worse, stolen. His partner, Anya, had been the one closest to the breach. They found her in her car, an overdose that was too clean, too perfect. The case was sealed before Rowan could even ask the first question. He had walked away from the CIU the next day. He left the world of chasing ghosts in spreadsheets and files and returned to the tangible world of flesh and blood. He came to the ER to save people, one at a time. He had traded the pursuit of justice for the immediacy of life. He would not chase ghosts again. But a ghost had just walked into his ER. Cassia's phone buzzed softly on the tray. It was Elodie. Cassia let it ring, her gaze still locked on Rowan. The man who had signed that wound onto her skin worked for Merrick Zorick. Zorick ran the Night Wharf Syndicate, a leech of an organization that had found a new, horrific market. They recycled medical data. They found the secrets buried in lab results, prescription histories, and psychiatric notes, and they weaponized them for blackmail. Now, Zorick wanted it all. He wanted the docks, the shipping lanes, and the vast invisible layer of medical data that flowed through the city, the data that Cassia, through her own networks, was trying to firewall. Elodie had found the key, a brilliant, insidious piece of code she had dubbed Blue Marlin. It was an algorithm, not a simple virus, and it was alive. It was swimming through the metadata of satellite hospital labs, skimming information so subtly it was almost invisible. If Zorick fully unleashed it, Seattle would drown in a wave of targeted, medical-based extortion. That was what tonight had been about. Elodie had been in the North Lake parking garage, following a digital trail. When they moved on her, Cassia had been waiting, her own team in place. But the ambush was faster, more brutal than she had anticipated. Cassia had gotten Elodie into a secured car, shoving her sister to the floorboards as bullets sparked off the concrete pillars. The last man, the one with the knife, had emerged from behind a utility van, Karlik. He had been fast. Cassia had taken the cut as she disarmed him, the blade sinking deep. It was the price for the lead. The assassin had escaped, but Elodie was safe. Rowan finished typing his notes into the terminal, his back to her. 2 lives, 2 opposing codes, now trapped in the same sterile room. Cassia's rule was simple. Born in the dockyards, protect your people. You protect them with the truth if you can. You protect them with blood debt if you must. It was their choice. Rowan's rule was the one he lived by every time the sirens wailed, "Save the person first, justice comes later," or, as he had learned, sometimes it never comes at all. He turned, holding a small paper cup with 2 antibiotic pills. "Take these." She took the cup. Their fingers did not brush, but the space between them vibrated with the collision of their 2 worlds. The doctor who had buried his past, and the woman who was actively fighting hers, their orbits, separate for so long, had just irrevocably crossed. The fluorescent lights in Bay 6 buzzed, flickered, and died. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor flatlined into an abrupt, profound silence. For a moment, Rowan Calder was suspended in absolute, sterile darkness. The only sound the ragged breathing of the woman on the gurney. He stood perfectly still, counting. 1 second, 2. The hospital's emergency generator was hardwired to kick in within 2.5 seconds. 3, 4. The red emergency floods finally flickered on, bathing the room in a dim, arterial glow. The main lights hummed back to life a full second later, but the lag was wrong. It was terrifyingly wrong. "Someone just tampered with the grid," Rowan said, his voice quiet. The doctor was gone, replaced by the CIU investigator. That wasn't a standard failure. That was a deliberate delay. They were buying time. Before he could move, Cassia was off the gurney. The motion must have sent fire along her stitches, but she only hissed, a sharp intake of air. She grabbed his scrub top. "Out, now, not the hallway." Her grip was iron. She ignored the MOCD cops waiting outside, ignoring the protocol. She pulled him, not toward the main ER, but toward an unmarked side door. Staff only. She shoved it open, revealing a small, dark linen closet, the air thick with the smell of bleach and industrial detergent. She dragged him into the narrow space between high metal shelves packed with blue towels and shut the door, plunging them into near darkness, lit only by the thin gray line of light beneath the door. "They're not just watching," she whispered, her voice close in the confined space. "They're inside." Rowan could feel the heat radiating from her. He was acutely aware of her closeness, her side wound just inches from him. A noise in the hall, the heavy, coordinated thud of boots on linoleum, trying to sound casual, failing. Elevator maintenance," a man's voice called out, artificially loud. "We heard the generator trip the lift controls on this wing." Cassia looked at Rowan, her eyes invisible in the dark, but he could feel her gaze. She held up 3 fingers against the faint light of the door crack. 3 of them. "Where's the patient from Bay 3? Another voice asked, sharp and impatient. It was not a doctor. "Voss, the nurse said she was moved to Bay 6. "We need to get her to the CT scanner immediately," the first voice commanded. "Orders from the attending physician. Possible internal bleeding, needs imaging. We'll take her up." A cold dread settled in Rowan's stomach. A CT scanner. It was brilliant, a planned overdose of radiation during the scan. It would look like a tragic medical accident, a machine malfunction, clean, untraceable, and deadly. The doorknob to the linen closet jiggled, locked. "Check the utility rooms," the lead gunman barked. Rowan did not panic. His mind, trained to see systems, saw the panel on the wall beside him, the nurse call control board. He acted without thought, prying the plastic cover off with his fingertips. He did not need to hack the software. He just crossed 2 wires. An instant. Piercing alarm blared through the ER, but not a fire alarm, a code blue. And it was not coming from their location. He had triggered it in the opposite wing, cardiac care. "Code blue, CCU all hands," a nurse shouted from the main desk. The hallway, which had been quiet, erupted into chaos. The sound of running feet, the clatter of a crash cart, the two hospital security guards, who had been ambling toward the maintenance men, now turned and sprinted toward the CCU. "Ignore it," the gunman ordered, but he had lost the initiative. The MOCD cops were yelling for order. The entire flow of the hospital was now working against them. Rowan grabbed Cassia's arm. "Now!" Cassia glanced at the sparking panel, then at him. A flicker of cold, genuine admiration passed over her features. "You are full of surprises, Doctor." He pulled her from the closet, keeping low. They slipped past the distracted cluster of gunmen and cops and moved down a secondary corridor. Cassia pointed. "Laundry." He shoved the door. The room was hot, steamy, dominated by a large stainless steel laundry chute. "Your stitches," Rowan said, his voice low. "You'll tear every one of them." "It's better than a bullet," she retorted. "Go." He did not argue. He swung his legs into the chute and let go, sliding down the dark, polished metal. He landed hard on a massive pile of soiled scrubs and sheets in the basement, the impact rattling his teeth. A second later, Cassia landed beside him, almost silently, like a cat. She bit back a sharp cry, her hand flying to her side. "Status?" he asked, using the old CIU term. "Intact." She was lying, but she was already moving. The basement was a labyrinth of humming dryers and concrete pillars. Cassia did not hesitate, leading him to a low-access hatch marked Steam Conduit H4. He wrestled the heavy iron door open. A blast of suffocating, damp heat hit them. The tunnel was narrow, barely shoulder width, lit by a few caged low-watt bulbs. The air was thick and tasted of rust. They moved in single file, Rowan in front. The heat was oppressive. Sweat ran down his back, soaking his scrubs. He could hear Cassia's breathing behind him, shallow and controlled. He stopped listening. He heard faint footsteps, far above them, on the ER floor. Cassia bumped into his back. The contact was a jolt. She was pressed against him, her chest against his shoulder blade. He could feel her heart hammering, a frantic, powerful rhythm that matched his own. In the humid darkness, the boundary between them, doctor and patient, vanished. There were only two people, trapped and running. He pushed forward. The tunnel ended at a steel ladder. He climbed, pushing the hatch at the top. It opened with a metallic groan. Cold, misty night air washed over them. They were in the loading bay, hidden behind a row of massive recycling dumpsters. The rain had finally eased. A figure stepped out from behind a waste compactor. He was young, dressed in hospital scrubs and holding a pistol with a practiced grip. "The boss said you'd try the service exits," the gunman said. He looked nervous, but his hand was steady. Rowan froze. He was a healer, not a fighter. Cassia, however, moved. She did not attack. She took one step toward the gunman, her hand raised placatingly, her shoulders slumped. "Please," she whispered, her voice sounding weak, pleading. "We just want to leave. I'm hurt." It was a flawless performance. The gunman hesitated, his brain trying to reconcile the predator he was warned about with the victim he saw. In that half-second of confusion, Cassia closed the distance. It was not a fight. It was physics. Her left hand shot out, not for the gun but for his wrist, clamping down and twisting it, pointing the barrel toward the sky. Her right elbow snapped back and then forward in a brutal, precise arc, connecting solidly under his jaw. Rowan heard the wet, sickening crack of the impact. The gunman did not make a sound. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, unconscious before he hit the wet pavement. The pistol clattered harmlessly. Rowan stared, his stomach churning. He had seen the results of violence his entire career. He had never seen it delivered with such cold, economical, and terrifying efficiency. There was no wasted motion, no anger, just a problem. Solved. Cassia took one deep, shuddering breath. Her hand pressed hard against her side. The stitches were bleeding again. He'll wake up, eventually. She limped toward the staff parking lot. Section C, row 4. A gray, unremarkable sedan sat waiting, blending in perfectly. The doors were unlocked, the keys were in the ignition. Rowan slid into the passenger seat as Cassia started the engine. It purred to life, quiet and powerful. "This was prepared," Rowan stated. "Of course," Cassia said, her voice tight with pain. She pulled out of the parking space, driving slowly. Just another hospital employee finishing a late shift. "You knew," Rowan said, the pieces clicking into place. "You knew they would come to the hospital. You knew they had an inside track." "I knew Night Wharf had an asset inside Northlake's data system," Cassia said, her eyes on the road. "I couldn't find the breach from the outside. They were buried too deep." She turned onto the main road, heading away from the city lights. "So I gave them a reason to activate their assets," she continued. "I made myself vulnerable. I forced them to move on me. Here, on their own ground." Rowan finally understood. The MOCD cops, the maintenance men, the generator lag, you didn't just lure them to the hospital. You lured them out. You needed to see who, inside the system, would help them. "And I did," she said simply. She stopped at a red light. She looked back, her profile silhouetted against the massive glass and steel structure of North Lake Meridian, a beacon of light in the wet darkness. "It's the one place," Cassia whispered, the anesthetic completely gone now, her own pain rising like a tide. "The one place where pain forces everyone to be honest." She turned, her gray eyes finding him in the dim light of the dashboard. "Tonight, the pain will tell the rest of the story." The sedan was quiet as it moved through the deep, wet night of Vashon Island. The short ferry ride from Fauntleroy had been a tense, silent blur. Rowan had watched the dark water. Cassia had watched the other cars. Now, they were on a long, unlit road, hemmed in by massive Douglas firs that dripped with rain. The only sounds were the tires on the asphalt and the distant, mournful horn of the returning ferry. The safe house, Rain Shadow, was not a bunker. It was a simple, dark-stained cedar cabin set back from the road, invisible until you were on top of it. Inside, it was clean, sparse, and smelled of cold pine and fireplace ash. Cassia moved directly to the large window overlooking the black, churning water of the Sound. Rowan found the first aid kit. It was, like everything else, professional and well-stocked. "The couch," he ordered. "I need to check those stitches. The chute and the loading dock were not sterile." She did not argue. She was pale, her energy reserves clearly exhausted. She unbuttoned the new shirt, a man's plaid flannel, left in the sedan's go bag, and eased it off her shoulder. Rowan turned on a table lamp, the warm light illuminating the angry red map of her wound. He cleaned his hands meticulously, then began to gently disinfect the area. The edges of the suture line were inflamed, a few stitches visibly strained from her movements. His hands, usually so steady in the ER, had a fine tremor. He was no longer in his world. He was in hers, and he was touching her, not as a patient, but as a person whose reality had just violently intersected his own. He felt the tremor and hoped she did not. She did. She watched his hand, not his face. "You're not built for this, doctor," she whispered. Her voice was not mocking, just stating a fact. "No one should be," he replied, his voice rough. He applied a fresh dressing, his touch as light as he could manage. As he taped the bandage, she unstrapped the thin leather sheath from her right forearm. It held a narrow, lethal-looking dagger. She held it out to him, hilt first. Rowan looked at the knife, then at her. "What's this?" "Insurance," she said, her eyes heavy. "I don't sleep with weapons under my pillow, but tonight I'm going to sleep. You hold it." It was the single most profound gesture of trust she could have made. He, the man who had seen her at her weakest, was now being trusted with her last line of defense. He took the cold, heavy steel from her. He placed it on the table. Between them, a silent contract. A laptop on the side table pinged, "Elodie." Cassia nodded, and Rowan accepted the incoming video call. Her sister's face, sharp and anxious, filled the screen. Cassia, you're safe. Thank God. But it's worse. The asset you flushed out. They're not just running, they're trying to burn the building down. What did they do? Cassia asked, leaning forward, the movement causing her to wince. They're framing Rowan, Elodie said flatly. The MOCD just received a tip. A file dump showing bank transfers and data logs. It makes Dr. Calder look like their man inside the hospital, laundering data for you. They're making him the scapegoat. Rowan felt the blood drain from his face, his past at the CIU, his access to the hospital's secure systems. It was the perfect, clean narrative. He was no longer just a witness. He was a suspect. Cassia's eyes turned to steel. Elodie, lock down everything. Go dark. I'll call when it's time. She ended the call. She looked at Rowan, her expression unreadable. I have people. They can have you on a plane to Vancouver in 2 hours. New papers by morning. You will be gone. Rowan shook his head, the motion slow. He thought of his partner, Anya. He thought of the file sealed shut. He thought of the ghosts he had tried to outrun. No, he said. If I run, I'm not me. If I run, they win. They've already killed one partner of mine by burying the truth. Cassia studied him for a long, silent moment. That was the answer. It was the only answer she would have respected. It was a principle she understood. Good, she said. Then we don't run. We poison the well. Rowan sat in the chair opposite her. Blue Marlin. Elodie said it was an algorithm. How do we stop it? We can't. Not from the outside, Cassia said. It's designed to migrate. We shut down one server. It seeds itself in 3 others. We have to find the primary node, the place where Zorik collects the final product. So how do we find it? We salt the data, she replied. We feed it a piece of information so toxic, so valuable, that Blue Marlin's protocols will be forced to deliver it directly to the main node, bypassing the usual relays. We give it a target. Pier Alder, Rowan said, the name dropping into the room. The container dock, the one-night wharf controls. It's the only logical hub. Cassia agreed. We plant the salt, we track it, and when it surfaces at Pier Alder, we pull the plug. She made to stand to emphasize her point, but the sudden movement was a mistake. A violent spasm seized her, the muscles in her side locking in protest. She gasped, a raw, involuntary sound, and folded in on herself. Rowan was moving before he had time to think. He was across the small space, his hands on her, steadying her, one hand on her shoulder, the other sliding around her back, just above her uninjured hip. Breathe, he commanded, his voice firm, pulling her upright against him, slow, deep, through the pain. She was rigid, her body trembling against his, her forehead pressed against his collarbone. He could feel her sharp, ragged breaths. He was acutely aware of the warmth of her skin through the thin flannel, the scent of antiseptic and pine, and the sudden, disorienting intimacy of holding her. She was not a mafia boss. She was just a woman, in agonizing pain. He held her for a long second after the spasm passed, his hand lingering. Her breathing slowed. The air between them was charged, the moment stretching thin. The only thing I'm afraid of, she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest, is losing her. Elodie, she's all that's left. It was a confession that cost her more than the pain. Rowan did not answer. He gently took her wrist, the one that had held the dagger. His fingers found her pulse. It was fast, a thrumming, vital beat. He placed his other hand over hers, covering it. As long as this pulse is here, he said, his voice quiet. We are here. We keep her safe. She finally pulled back, her gray eyes searching for him. Later, they sat by the unlit fireplace, the rain a dull roar on the cedar roof. They did not try to sleep. The tension was too high. My first car, Rowan said, his voice quiet in the dark room. An '84 hatchback. The brakes failed on the Ship Canal Bridge. I've never felt so helpless. Cassia looked at the cold, black grate. I have a scar, she said, her voice just as low. Right shoulder. From when I was 10, I pulled a neighborhood kid back from a rusty rebar spike at the docks. He fell anyway, broke his arm. I learned you can't save everyone from their own choices. The first time I trusted the wrong person, Rowan countered, was at the CIU. He sold us out for a promotion. It got Anya killed. The first time I did, Cassia said. He ran my mother's shop into bankruptcy. I was 16. I never made that mistake again. It was not a seduction. It was not a confession. It was a trade, an exchange of old scars, old failures, the fragile, hesitant beginning of an alliance, built not on pretty words, but on the shared, ugly truth of the cracks they both carried. The Silt and Ember was a bar that floated on the oily, black water of the Duwamish River. Smelling of low tide and old secrets, it was neutral ground. Cassia had summoned the Dock Council, the shadow syndicate of captains and warehouse foremen who truly ran the waterfront. Rowan stood in the corner, nursing a glass of water, his presence a silent, jarring statement. He was not one of them, but he was with her. Cassia stood at the head of a rough-hewn oak table. The room was quiet. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the hull. "The Voss Consortium is changing its logistics model," she announced, her voice cutting through the smoky air. "Effective immediately. We are dissolving the expedited shipping routes. All cargo will be rerouted through our new cold chain infrastructure. It is 100% legitimate." The room exploded. A heavy man named Kovalchuk, who ran the dry goods terminals, slammed his fist on the table. "Legitimate, you are cutting our revenue by half. You are inviting the feds to look at all our books." "I am cutting a liability," Cassia countered, her voice dangerously calm. "Night Wharf is using those routes to move more than goods. They are moving data, and they are moving weapons. They brought a knife to my door. I will not have that infection in my house." "This is suicide," another foreman muttered. "This is survival," Cassia said. "The old way is over. The new way keeps us clean, and it keeps us rich, just in a different commodity." A new face, a woman Rowan had not seen before, spoke up from the back. "So you cut the legs off Zorik, and you legitimize your own business. Smart, but it makes you a target. Voss, and it makes us one, too." "We are already targets," Cassia said. "This is how we fight back. You are either with me or you are in my way." The meeting ended in a stalemate of angry, nervous acceptance. She'd drawn a new line. She'd created new allies, and she had just sharpened the motives of her enemies. Rowan felt his burner phone vibrate in his pocket 2 days later. He was at a Pike Place overlook, the gray sky pressing down on the Sound. He had been a ghost for 48 hours, and he hated it. The message was simple: Lincoln Park, noon, bench by the water. He went alone. 2 men in expensive, ill-fitting suits were waiting. They looked like federal agents trying to look like they were not. Pacific Racketeering Bureau. "Dr. Calder," the older one said, not offering a hand. "You're a hard man to find." "I'm not lost," Rowan said. "You are, though," the younger one sneered. "You're an accessory to organized crime. We have the data logs. We have the bank transfers. You, feeding Northlake medical files straight to the Voss Consortium." Rowan remained silent. He watched a ferry crawl across the water. "Here's the one-time offer," the older agent said, leaning in. "You're looking at 10 to 15 years. Federal, or you walk away, a free man. We need Cassia Voss. We know she's bleeding. We know she's hiding. You give us her location. You wear a wire. You testify on what you've seen." "You want me to help you take down the woman who just exposed your competition?" Rowan asked, his voice neutral. "We want the whole nest. Zorik, Voss, all of them. You're just the rat we need to get inside." Rowan stood up. He looked at the men, his gaze as cold and flat as the water. "I'm a doctor. I took an oath. You're talking about a patient." "That oath is void, doctor," the agent snapped. "Your career is over, one way or another. You have until Friday to decide." I don't need until Friday," Rowan said. He turned and walked away, his hand in his pocket, his thumb pressing the stop button on the micro recorder he had activated the moment he saw them. Insurance. Cassia, meanwhile, was making a new, far more dangerous deal. She met Grace Amini, the crab pot queen, on a working pier in Ballard. Grace was a legend, a woman who ran a fleet of fishing boats that knew every current and cove from Nia Bay to Olympia. "You want tidal data," Grace said, her hands busy mending a net, her eyes never leaving Cassia's face. "You want to know how the water moves, down to the inch, at 3 a.m. during a storm surge. That's not logistics, that's hiding." "I want to move temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals," Cassia said, not blinking. "My new cold chain. I need the fastest, most fuel-efficient routes, ones that avoid commercial traffic." Grace laughed, a short, barking sound. "You're a terrible liar, Voss, but I like your nerve. You want to hide your routes from Zorich, and probably from the feds. What do I get?" "Exclusive docking rights at my terminal in Tacoma. 0 fees for 5 years. Grace stopped her work. "That's a lot of money." "It's a lot of data," Cassia replied. Grace nodded, extending a hand rough as barnacles. "Done." As Cassia turned to leave, her encrypted phone buzzed. It was LOD. "I found it. Cassia, I found the money. Night Wharf isn't just using banks. They have their own Alder Mutual. It's a front." "Get to the point, Elodie." "The point is, the money is just a symptom. I found the source of Blue Marlin. Zorich didn't build it. He's a client. The original code, the master ledger, is being auctioned." "Where?" Cassia demanded, her voice dropping. "This Friday, a private black hat biotech auction. It's called Helix and Carbon. They're selling it as a next-generation predictive health algorithm. And Cassia, it's not on land, it's on a yacht." That night, back at the Rain Shadow safe house, the three of them, Cassia, Rowan, and Elodie on the secure screen, put the puzzle together. "It's a perfect trap," Rowan said. "The PRB gives me until Friday. The auction is on Friday. They are coordinating. They want you, and they want the Blue Marlin code for themselves." "They're not just dirty," Cassia said, pacing in front of the cold fireplace. "They're a rival player." "So what's the plan?" Rowan asked. Cassia stopped pacing. "The plan is simple. We steal the ledger and the master code from the auction. We unplug Blue Marlin at its source. And then," she smiled, a cold, thin expression, "we give the PRB exactly what they want, a monster. We'll hand-deliver them to Merrick Zorich, gift-wrapped." "You're missing the problem," Rowan warned, his voice low. "The PRB has agents on both sides. They're playing you against Zorich the moment you touch that ledger. You're not just fighting Night Wharf. You're fighting a shadow faction inside the government." "Good," Cassia said, her eyes flashing. "Let them come. We'll drag them all into the light, one by one." "There's one more thing," Elodie said, her voice small on the laptop. "I got a new piece of intel from a source inside Zorich's camp." Cassia looked at the screen. "What is it?" "The order for Karlik. It's been updated. His original contract was just for you, but after the hospital, the order has been revised. He is to terminate you and Dr. Calder, on site." The room went utterly silent. Rowan felt the air leave his lungs. He was no longer a witness. He was a target. Cassia looked at him, really looked at him, her gaze lingering far longer than was necessary, far longer than was tactical. She was seeing, for the first time, not a man who had been dragged into her world, but the consequence of her actions. He was on that list because of her. She had spent her entire life ensuring she had no public vulnerabilities. She had just realized she was staring at her first one, and the realization was both terrifying and, in a way she could not yet name, utterly irresistible. The night before the auction, the rain returned. It was not the angry assault of before, but a heavy, relentless drumming on the safe house's tin roof. 1,000 fingers tapping, reminding them of the time slipping away. They had been planning for hours, maps of the yacht's layout spread across the floor, Elodie's data streams open on the laptop. Rowan, used to 24-hour shifts, was running on pure adrenaline. Cassia Rowan noted, had not eaten a single thing. She was fueled by a different, darker energy. She stood up too quickly from the floor, and the room tilted. She swayed, a hand flying to the wall to steady herself. "When was the last time you ate?" Rowan's voice was sharp, the doctor in him taking over. "It doesn't matter." "It does," he said, already moving to the small kitchen. "Your adrenaline is crashing. You're hypoglycemic." He returned, not with food, but with a glass of water laced with sugar. "Drink this, slowly." Cassia took the glass, her hand shaking slightly. It was an admission of weakness she despised. As she drank, she looked over the rim of the glass, her gaze lost in the fire he had built in the hearth. "I need you to be functional, Cassia. Not just upright," he said, his voice softening. He took the empty glass and, before she could pull away, placed his warm hand on the back of her neck, just below her hairline. It was a grounding, clinical touch that was not clinical at all. His thumb pressed gently. "Breathe deep." She did, and the world slowly stopped spinning. The warmth of his hand, steady and strong, was a counterpoint to the cold dread of the coming day. The firelight danced across the sharp planes of her face, catching the exhaustion she hid so well. "I'm tired," she whispered, so low he almost did not hear it. "I'm so tired of always being the blade." Rowan's hand stilled on her neck. He understood. The blade does not get tired. It does not get to be held. It only cuts. He moved his hand from her neck to her arm, turning her to face him. He did not pull her close, but he did not step away. "It's okay," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Tonight, you don't have to be the blade. Let me be the shoulder." They stood in the quiet, the rain and the fire, the only sounds. She looked up at him, her gray eyes searching for him, looking for the lie, for the angle, for the price. She found none. Slowly, as if moving through water, they leaned in. It was not a collision of passion, but a surrender to truth. Their foreheads touched. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing, inhaling the same air, their heart beating a frantic, unspoken rhythm. His eyes asked the question. Hers, by closing, gave the answer. He kissed her. It was slow, hesitant, a question, not a demand. It was a kiss that tasted of sugar water and fireplace smoke and the relief of a shared, terrible burden. Cassia's leather jacket, which she had not taken off all night, was suddenly too heavy. She shrugged out of it. It slouched to the floor. Her forearm dagger, still sheathed, falling from the inside pocket, it hit the wooden floor with a sharp, metallic ting. And Cassia laughed. It was not a smile. It was a real, unguarded, rusty laugh that surprised her as much as it did him. The sound of her one remaining piece of armor, discarded. Rowan smiled against her lips, a real smile of his own. He pulled back just enough to look at her. "You are strong, Cassia," he whispered, "but you don't have to be strong alone." She looked at him, her face open and vulnerable in the firelight. Then she nodded once. She raised a hand, not to his face, but to his chest, pressing her palm flat against his heart. She felt the steady, powerful beat of it beneath his shirt, and she kept it there, as if taking a pulse, as if anchoring herself. They sank down in front of the fireplace, the maps and data forgotten. Rowan pulled a thick wool blanket from the back of the couch, and they wrapped themselves in it. They lay on their sides, facing each other, the blanket covering their shoulders. They were close, the heat from the fire warming their faces, the heat from each other's bodies, a more potent, living thing. They said nothing for a long time. They just looked. They looked past the facades, past the doctor and the crime boss, and saw the two people who had shared their scars in the dark. This time, Cassia moved first. She raised herself on one elbow, her dark hair falling to obscure her face from the fire. She looked down at him, and he saw a flicker of the old, calculating Cassia, not weighing an opponent, but weighing a choice. She leaned down and kissed him again. This kiss was different. It was not a question. It was an answer. It was slow and deep and deliberate. It was the language of a woman who had spent her life in fortified control and who was now, for one night, choosing to surrender a piece of it. Her body, which had been tense, finally relaxed against his, her hand moving from his heart to his face. It was the most profound leap she had ever taken. Much later, as the fire burned down to embers and the rain on the roof became a lulling sound, she lay with her head on his chest. "Rowan," she said, her voice sleepy, "if tomorrow is a disaster, if it all goes wrong—" He waited. "Remember tonight," she finished, her voice finding its strength. This was a choice, not a vulnerability. He tightened his arm around her, pulling the blanket closer. "I'll remember," he promised. The Mariners' Arcade was not a market. It was a living, breathing rumor mill, housed in the cavernous, salt-caked belly of an abandoned pier. The air smelled of damp earth, old metal, and the bitter tang of ozone from counterfeit electronics. Cassia Voss moved through the low, amber-lit crowd like a ghost, her face obscured by the shadow of a dark hood. She was the one planting the whispers, the Alder Mutual ledger, the master key to Night Wharf's entire financial structure, was in play. Rowan followed, keeping the mandatory 3 paces behind her. He was her shadow, and he had never felt more out of place. He was a man of sterile rooms and bright lights. This place felt septic. The chaos started precisely when Cassia said it would. "PRB federal agents' hands visible." The shout came from both ends of the long hall. The crowd surged, a panicked wave of bodies, but as the agents, clad in heavy blue tactical vests, began detaining people, Rowan's trained eye caught the flaw. It was too sloppy and too specific. He watched the man leading the raid, Major Van, a face he recognized from his old CIU files. Van, with his back to the crowd, made direct eye contact with a hulking Night Wharf enforcer standing by a noodle stall. The enforcer was not being arrested. Van gave a nearly invisible jerk of his chin, a stay-put signal. The enforcer nodded. A cold certainty settled in Rowan's gut. The Pacific Racketeering Bureau and Night Wharf were not just corrupt, they were partners. This raid was not an operation. It was a corporate takeover. Cassia grabbed his arm, pulling him into a narrow, dark alcove as the agent swept past. Her encrypted phone buzzed. She pressed it to her ear, her face inches from his in the darkness. "Elodie, talk to me." "They're moving, Cassia. The raid was a distraction. Blue Marlin just changed nodes." Elodie's voice was fast, terrified. "They're dumping the Alder hub. The primary node just relocated." "Where?" "A dead drop. A private server farm. It's called C-Stack Data Farm. It's in Ballard, inside that old abandoned water tower." "How long?" 36 hours, Elodie said, her voice grim. "After that, the primary drive scrubs itself clean, and the algorithm is gone. They'll have a new master, and we'll have nothing." As Cassia ended the call, Rowan's own burner phone vibrated. A text from an old, unlisted CIU contact. "Friendly tip, Calder, you're hot." Attached was a video file. He played it. The footage was grainy, time-stamped from the night he had met Cassia. It showed him, clearly, standing by the loading dock, a figure, obscured in a dark hood, stepped into frame, a woman, unmistakably Cassia, and handed him a thick envelope. The camera angle made it look exactly like a payoff. "They're framing me," Rowan said, his voice a low, furious growl. "They're painting me as the internal leak." Cassia watched the video over his shoulder, her expression unreadable. "They're clumsy," she said. "Clumsy. This is a federal case, Cassia. This is my entire life." "They made a mistake," she said, her voice cold and precise. "They put me in the frame. Don't worry, doctor. I'll be sure to appear in the right frame, at the right time, to break their entire setup." She put the phone away. "We're not done here." "The PRB is everywhere," he hissed. "They're on the main floor. We're going down." She led him to a service hatch hidden beneath a stack of rotten pallets. The basement was a hot, hissing labyrinth of steam pipes in a small, caged-off room. A terrified, thin man was frantically unplugging a rack of hard drives. "Tovik," Cassia said. The man, Tovik, dropped a drive. He turned, his eyes wide. He did not see Rowan, he only saw Cassia. Cassia was on him in 2 steps. She did not bother with a weapon. She slammed him against the wire cage, her forearm pressed hard against his windpipe. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice a low hiss. "You're supposed to be on the yacht. You're supposed to be prepping the ledger for the auction." "They moved it," he choked, his face turning purple. "They're taking the master copy. I'm just scrubbing the sandboxes." "Show me," she demanded, easing the pressure just enough for him to breathe. He fumbled for a laptop, his hands shaking so badly he could barely type. "It's all there. The auction, the helix and carbon. That's the real ledger." "And the defenses?" Cassia asked. "You can't get in," Tovik gasped, pure terror in his eyes. "You can't. He's guarding it himself. Karlich, he wired the entire vault. Pressure traps on the floor. It's not just a sensor, lady. He's calibrated it to his targets. He has your file. He knows your exact weight, down to the ounce." Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor above them. The PRB, or Night Wharf, getting organized. "We're leaving," Cassia said, grabbing Tovik's laptop. "The only way out is the main stairwell," Rowan said. "We're not going up. We're going through." She kicked open a rusted grate, revealing a wide, dark concrete pipe, a storm drain. They ran, hunched over, the air cold and foul. They burst out of the tunnel into a narrow service alley filled with wooden crates. A sharp, violent thwack exploded next to Rowan's ear. He stared, confused, at the wooden crate beside him. A perfect dark hole had appeared, splinters radiating from it. "Sniper!" Rowan yelled, his CIU training kicking in. "Suppressed! He's high!" Another thwack. A second bullet punched into the crate, this one aimed at his chest. Rowan dove back, but before he could move, Cassia was on him. It was not a pull, it was a tackle. She slammed her body into his, shoving him behind the relative safety of a steel support column. It was a purely instinctive act, using her own body as a shield. A third bullet, meant for her, screamed off the high carbon steel, showering them both in a rain of concrete dust and acrid smoke. "Go, go!" she yelled. She shoved him toward a steel door. It opened onto a low dock, the dark water of the Duwamish River lapping at the pilings. As if summoned by their escape, the low thrum of a diesel engine grew louder. A battered fishing trawler, Grace Amini at the helm, slid from the fog. "Get on!" Grace yelled. They half fell, half jumped onto the deck. The boat reversed, its powerful engine churning the black water, and disappeared back into the industrial haze of the river. The night was suddenly, deafeningly quiet. The only sound was the pulse of the engine and the hiss of the water. Seattle was a string of distant, indifferent lights. Rowan leaned against the railing, his heart hammering. He looked down at his wrist, a long, bloody gash, ripped open by a splinter from the crate. Cassia appeared from the cabin, a small first aid kit in her hand. She did not ask if he was okay. She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly gentle. "Hold still," she commanded. She cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe, her movements efficient. As she wrapped a clean, white bandage around his wrist, her fingers paused, resting for just a fraction of a second on his pulse. Their eyes met in the darkness, the doctor, and the woman who had just taken a bullet for him. He did not have to say it. She did not have to say it. The look said everything. They were in this. They were in so deep there was no longer a way back. The yacht Helios was not a boat. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, floating in the black heart of Elliott Bay. The helix and carbon auction was in full swing. Men in tuxedos and women in silk dresses sipped champagne, their voices a polite murmur over the classical strings. They were here to bid on the future of genetics, unaware that the real prize was a relic of the past. It sat on a black velvet pedestal in the main salon of vintage, heavy hard drive casing, presented as a piece of tech nostalgia. Inside it, however, lay the black microchip ledger of the Night Wharf Syndicate. Cassia Voss, draped in emerald silk, looked every bit the part of a Chilean venture capitalist. She laughed softly, speaking rapid, accented Spanish to a portly man beside her. Rowan, stiff and uncomfortable in a borrowed tuxedo, played his role as her biomedical advisor perfectly, his gaze sharp, his presence a stabilizing, serious counterpoint to her supposed extravagance. Far from the yacht, Elodie, the eye in the sky, piloted a network of modified commercial drones, feeding them a visual on the water. Grace Amini's trawler, dark and low, emitted a powerful, localized signal, jamming the Helios's primary radar and masking their approach. They moved toward the aft lounge, where the vintage tech was displayed, in a darkened security room deep in the ship's hull. Karlik watched them on a monitor. He was not fooled by the silk dress or the diamonds. He zoomed in, not on her face, but on her feet. He watched her walk. It was her gait, purposeful, measured, grounded. She did not drift or loiter. It was the walk of a fighter, a predator, and he recognized it. He checked the file Tovik had given him. He knew her precise weight, his lip curled in a smile. He tapped a sequence into his console. In the sterile, blue-lit corridor that led to the private vault, a series of thin, metallic plates, nearly invisible against the reflective flooring, chimed, arming themselves. They were calibrated to her. As Cassia and Rowan approached the corridor, she saw them, a faint discoloration on the glass floor. She stopped, pulling Rowan back into the shadow of a bulkhead. "He's here," she whispered, "and he knows it's me. The floor is trapped." Two guards, large and bored, stood at the far end by the vault door. Rowan looked at the guards, then at the bar in the center of the lounge. He nodded. Once. "Buy me 30 seconds. He walked, not to the vault, but to the crowded bar. He spotted his target, a loud, ruddy-faced man arguing with the bartender. Rowan stumbled as if jostled, splashing his club soda onto the man's expensive sleeve. "Watch it, you clumsy," the man began, turning. Rowan did not apologize. He looked at the man, his eyes wide with the practiced, terrifying calm of an ER doctor. "Sir, your color. Are you having difficulty breathing?" "What? No, I'm angry." Rowan put 2 fingers on the man's pulse, his grip like iron. "Your pulse is there. You're tachycardic. I'm a doctor." He looked at the bartender, his voice sharp and commanding. "This man is having a severe allergic reaction, or possibly an acute adrenaline surge. Get the house medical team, now." He laid the man back on a velvet couch. The man, now genuinely panicking, began to wheeze. "I need an EpiPen," Rowan shouted. The entire lounge turned. The 2 guards from the vault, their posts forgotten, rushed over to manage the medical emergency, radioing for the yacht's EMT. The room's focus had shifted. "Now," Rowan breathed, rejoining Cassia. She moved like smoke. She did not touch the floor. She used the polished chrome bulkheads, bracing herself, swinging, moving along the wall, her feet never touching the calibrated plates. He followed, his heavier weight keeping him to the edges. They reached the vault. It was a sleek, black panel, a biometric scanner. Cassia placed her hand on the plate. The scanner lit up. "Hand temperature accepted." A second line blinked red. "Pulse signature incomplete profile." It needs 2 people, Rowan realized. A simultaneous reading. He looked at the panel. There was a secondary sensor. Just below the main plate. He did not hesitate. He pressed his own wrist, the one with her bandage, against the cold glass. His heart was hammering. Pulse signature accepted. The vault door hissed open. Inside, the vintage drive was theirs. Cassia grabbed it, but also pulled a small, pen-sized device from her evening bag. She ran it over the casing. It chirped, a faint, sickly buzz. "A tracer," Rowan breathed. "A simple lead wipe." "No," Cassia said, her face grim. "It's a micro-radioactive dot, bonded, too weak to track from a distance. But they'll know we have it if we're on this boat. She pressed her earbud. Grace, Phase 2. Light the decoy. Now. Miles away, Grace Amini's trawler dropped a small, heavily shielded medical isotope into a buoy. The new signal, 100 times stronger, flared to life, painting a false target for anyone listening. They turned to leave, the hard drive hidden in Rowan's tuxedo jacket. I'm afraid I'll have to take that, Doctor. Tomas Leclerc stood in the vault doorway, Cassia's right-hand man, the one who ran her logistics, the one she trusted with her life. He held a pistol, fitted with a long, black silencer. Tomas, Cassia's voice was dead. You? It was never personal, Cassia, Leclerc said, his smile polite. The PRB pays well for loyalty. Night Wharf pays even better for betrayal. I just happened to be in a position to take both offers. He raised the pistol. The PRB wants the doctor alive, a witness. Night Wharf wants him dead. I'm just here for the ledger. He fired, not at them, but at the massive glass atrium ceiling far above their heads. The thwump of the silencer was lost in the shattering, raining explosion of glass. Shards hailed down. A second later, a dark shape dropped from the shattered roof, landing in a perfect silent crouch on the glass bridge connecting them to the lounge. Karlik. Thomas was the bait, Karlik hissed, his eyes on Rowan. The doctor's time is up. Leclerc, realizing he had been double-crossed, spun and fired at Karlik. The glass bridge erupted in a chaos of noise and violence. Karlik ignored Leclerc, his mission clear, his weapon tracking to Rowan. Leclerc fired again, trying to claim the ledger. Bullets cracked the very glass panels under their feet. Karlik took aim at Rowan's chest, a clean, killing shot. No, Rowan yelled. Exposed. Cassia acted. She did not have a gun. She grabbed the heavy, thick nautical rope that served as a decorative railing for the bridge. With a desperate, powerful twist of her body, she swung it like a whip, the heavy, knotted end uncoiled, striking Karlik's shooting arm with a sickening crack. The shot went wide, exploding the glass wall next to Rowan's head. The main alarms blared, triggered by the gunfire. Red lights strobed, and water from the fire suppression system began to rain down. This way, Cassia screamed. She tackled Rowan, pulling him not toward the shooters, but over the side of the bridge. They fell 10 feet, crashing onto the emergency lifeboat deck below. As Karlik and Leclerc roared at each other above, Cassia slashed the tethers of a deployment raft. They tumbled into it, and it dropped, hitting the cold, black water hard. The Helios was a pandemonium of alarms and shouting, but as their raft drifted, a new set of lights appeared from the darkness. It was long, dark, and fast, its silhouette disguised as a city ferry. Rowan, Cassia said, her voice flat, the ledger clutched in her hand. The radioactive decoy. They ignored it. They were never tracking the ledger. They were tracking you. The interceptor cut its engines, gliding beside them, its searchlight pinning them in a harsh, clinical white beam. Major Van stood on the deck, his face a mask of smug authority. Dr. Rowan Calder, Van's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. You are under arrest for conspiracy and collusion with organized crime. 2 agents dropped into the raft. They did not touch Cassia. They hauled Rowan to his feet, cuffing his hands behind his back. Rowan looked at Cassia. His face was not one of fear, but of a quiet, burning intensity. He was memorizing her. Cassia stood rigid in the rocking boat, the searchlight turning her skin a ghostly white. She did not try to fight them. She did not speak. She just watched them take him. The fire in her gray eyes was gone, replaced by something colder, heavier, a promise. The agents pushed him onto the deck of the PRB vessel. As the boat's engine roared to life, pulling away, Rowan's gaze never left hers, a silent, unbroken line across the churning black water until the darkness swallowed him. Cassia was picked up 3 minutes later by Grace Amini, the ledger safety, but the victory was ashes in her mouth. The call came 2 hours later, to Elodie. It was Tomas Leclerc. His voice was calm, infuriatingly reasonable. He's proposing a trade, Elodie reported, her face pale on the screen. Cassia was back at the rain shadow safe house, pacing, still in her damp silk dress. The terms, Cassia demanded. Rowan, for Grace Amini and the full schematics of your new cold chain routes. He says the PRB wants to seize your assets. He's just the middleman. He's lying, Cassia said. He's not a middleman, he's a broker. He's trying to sell the PRB a victory by handing them Grace and sell Nightwharf a victory by gutting my new business. Tell him. Tell him I'm considering it. I need 24 hours. Cassia, you're not... What? Just tell him, Cassia commanded. She was already setting the trap. Cassia, we have the ledger. Elodie pressed, her voice urgent. We have the names. We have the accounts. Let's just dump it. Give it to the press. Burn them all down right now. No, Cassia said, her voice sharp. You're thinking like a lawyer. If we dump that ledger now, the PRB and Nightwharf will bury it in a mountain of fake news. They'll call it a fabrication. They'll use their witness Rowan to discredit it. We'll be sunk in our own truth. Then what? We don't expose the crime, Cassia said, her eyes narrowing. We expose the partnership. We have to show the world that the PRB and Nightwharf are the same monster, breathing from the same lung. Until we do that, the ledger is just a piece of paper. She hung up. She looked at the clock. She had less than 36 hours before the C-Stack data farm scrubbed itself. She had to do it now, alone. The Ballard Water Tower was a rusted metal giant, a relic of an older Seattle. Cassia moved through its dark, hollow base. She climbed the interior ladder, her side protesting, her arms aching. The server farm was at the very top, in the old cavernous water tank, a nest of humming, blue-lit servers. This was the heart of Blue Marlin. She did not try to hack it. She attached a small, powerful magnetic pulse device to the central node. It was her own design, battery-powered, and tied to her phone. If she was betrayed, if Leclerc's trap closed, she would press one button. Blue Marlin would be scrambled into digital dust, and every ill-gotten account linked to it would be wiped. It was mutually assured destruction. Miles away, in a windowless room, Rowan Calder sat in a steel chair. He was silent. He was counting. He counted his breaths. He counted the heartbeats he imagined were passing. He was not in the room. He was back in the safe house. The scent of pine and rain, the warmth of the fire, her hand over his heart. He was holding on to that choice. Major Van entered, his face sour. The glorious arrest was not going as planned. You're making this difficult, Doctor, Van said, sitting opposite him. Your innocent act is weak. We have the video of you taking a payoff from Voss. Rowan said nothing. Van sighed, leaning forward, trying a new tactic. Look, I know how she operates. She manipulates people. You're a good man. You got in too deep. We have a new program, the Witness Vector Initiative. You give us the rest of her operation, her safe houses, her accounts, her sister's location, and we make this all go away. You get a new life. Rowan was silent for a long moment, not looking at Van, but at the two-way mirror on the wall. He finally turned his head, a slow, deliberate motion. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. Tell me, Major, Rowan asked, his voice a low, clinical rasp. Are you offering me redemption, or are you just looking for a doctor to cure your own infection? Van's face flushed with rage. That same afternoon, a courier delivered a flat 9x12 envelope to Major Van's personal office. Inside, there were two items. The first was a high-resolution scan of a single page from the Alder Mutual Ledger. It clearly showed a series of 7-figure transfers from Nightwharf to a shell company. The second was a photograph, grainy but clear, taken at a dockside bar 2 weeks prior. It showed Major Van himself, sharing a drink and laughing with Marek Zorich. Taped to the photo was a simple, typewritten note, pick a side, before the storm makes landfall. The night before the exchange, the rain began to fall again. Cassia Voss stood on a deserted pier in Bremerton, looking back at the Seattle skyline, a glittering, indifferent constellation. She was not the same woman who had walked into the hospital. She was cold. She was tired. She raised a hand unconsciously to the new scar on her side, the ridge of healed tissue beneath her shirt. She touched it, tracing the line. The man in that interrogation room was her vulnerability. He was the one thing in her life that was not planned, not controlled. He was her point of failure. She traced the scar again, and her lips curved in a hard, resolute smile. He was not her weakness. He was her anchor. Gray Terminal was a skeleton, a long-abandoned ferry dock jutting into the black water. A storm was breaking, a true Seattle gale that sent rain driving in horizontal sheets. The only light came from a single, blinking green navigational beacon at the end of the pier, casting a sickly, rhythmic pulse over the scene. It was a stage set for a final act. 3 factions moved into place, hidden from each other by the downpour and the rusted shipping containers. Cassia, with Elodie and Grace coordinating from a van a mile away, was tucked into a collapsed customs shed. Major Van and a dozen PRB agents, believing they were in control, held the main terminal entrance, and deep in the shadows, Marek Zorich, flanked by Karlik, waited to claim his prize and eliminate his treacherous middleman. In the center of the pier, under the single working sodium light, stood Thomas Leclerc. He held Rowan in front of him, hands cuffed, a pistol pressed to his head. Leclerc, arrogant and fatally overconfident, believed he was in charge. "The ledger, Cassia," Leclerc shouted into the wind, "or the doctor's witness vector application gets denied, permanently. You get what you've earned. Tomas." Cassia's voice came from everywhere, amplified by a small, hidden speaker. "What does that mean?" Leclerc demanded, his bravado wavering. "It means the show is starting," Cassia said. And on the Seattle waterfront across the bay, the massive digital billboards, the ones that usually sold cars and cruise lines, flickered, and then they lit up. It was not an advertisement. It was the Alder Mutual Ledger. Page after page of black and white data, account numbers, names, and transfer amounts broadcast for the entire city to see. Elodie, routing the signal through Grace's swarm of drones, had turned the skyline into a confession. "No," Van roared from the terminal, watching his name scroll past, tied to a 7-figure transfer from Zorich. "What did you do?" Leclerc screamed, his face a mask of panic. "That," Cassia's voice said, "was for Elodie." She stepped from the shadows, and she held up her phone, her thumb on the screen. "And this is for Rowan." She pressed the button. In the Ballard water tower, the magnetic pulse device detonated. It was a silent, invisible kill switch, the Blue Marlin algorithm. The heart of the entire criminal enterprise was not just wiped, it was scrambled into meaningless, catastrophic code. The money, the accounts, the leverage for both Night Wharf and the corrupt agents of the PRB vanished in a single, silent millisecond. Leclerc, his entire future evaporating, snapped. He was a rat in a trap, and he just started shooting. He fired wildly, not at Cassia, but at the shadows. His first bullet struck Marek Zorich in the chest, the man who had been paying him. Zorich collapsed, and the pier erupted. PRB agents, seeing their careers and their bank accounts dissolving on the public skyline, turned on each other. The loyalists against Van's compromised few. It was a firefight of self-destruction. Karlik, the professional, ignored it all. The money was gone. The bosses were irrelevant. His contract was simple. He raised his suppressed rifle, his red laser sight cutting through the rain, and centered it on Cassia's heart. Cassia. Rowan, his cuffs shattered by a lockpick Elodie had slipped him in his holding cell, was a blur of motion. He was not a fighter, but he was a protector. He launched himself at her, a full-body tackle, just as he had at the arcade. The sniper's bullet, meant for her, missed, screaming off the steel I-beam behind them with a high-pitched, metallic shriek. In that exact second, a bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in a brilliant, stark white freeze frame, Rowan and Cassia on the ground, Karlik reloading, and Leclerc, his gun empty, staring in horror. Cassia was up first. She kicked her pistol, which she had hidden on the pier, into her hand. Leclerc turned to run. Cassia did not shoot him in the back. She shot him. Once. A precise, devastating shot to the thigh, shattering his femur. He collapsed, screaming. She walked over to him, the rain plastering her dark hair to her face. Elodie's drones were still broadcasting, and Cassia knew one was on her. She jammed the muzzle of her gun into Leclerc's wounded leg, forcing a new scream of agony. On the feed, "Tomas," she commanded, her voice a deadly calm. Tell them who you worked for. Tell them how you betrayed us both." He sobbed, the pain overwhelming. I worked for Van and Zorik, both I told them. I told them everything. It was not a killing. It was a vivisection, a public execution of his honor, his name, and his future. It was a fate worse than death. Van, seeing his entire world end, made a break for the PRB interceptor. He was tackled by his own junior agents, the ones who were not on his payroll. They cuffed him with a brutal, satisfying efficiency. As the rain began to soften, a new sound cut through the night, the high-low wail of sirens. Not MOCD, not PRB. These were the sirens of the Western Financial Crimes Authority, the WFCA, the real feds, alerted by the public data dump, come to clean the house. The fight was over. Rowan walked to Cassia. She was standing in the middle of the pier, the storm passing, the adrenaline finally leaving her. She was shaking, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. He said nothing. He just took off his own rain-soaked jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was a simple, profound gesture of protection. She looked up at him, her gray eyes clear, the fire returning. A small, exhausted smile touched her lips. She leaned into him, her head resting on his chest, and whispered the words that had started it all. "Funny how pain still gets your attention." The knot, pulled tight for so long, was finally untied. The Voss Consortium, as it was, ceased to exist in its place. Cassia and Elodie launched the Rainline Foundation, a legitimate, powerful data security firm. It used their logistics and cold chain routes to protect patient data from the very extortion they had fought. The PRB was gutted and rebuilt from the ground up. Night Wharf, beheaded and bankrupt, collapsed. The ending was not a sunset, it was a sunrise, pale and realistic, over the new Community Care ER wing of North Lake Meridian, funded by Rainline's first grant. Cassia and Rowan stood by the nurses' station, not as a boss and a doctor, but as two people. They were not promising forever. They were signing a different kind of contract, a charter for the foundation that was also a charter for themselves. It included clauses for mandatory therapy, for public disclosure of disagreements, and for keeping each other anchored to the real, complicated world. A monitor beside them beeped with the steady, healthy rhythm of a patient's heart. Rowan reached out, and Cassia took his hand. It was a love that had not been easy or simple. It had been born in truth, forged in gunfire, and was now finally finding its own steady, quiet, everyday rhythm. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are all listening from, so please share your thoughts and where you are in the comments below. Let's connect. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.